Hello, and welcome to The Mind of a Therapist, podcast where I interview psychotherapists and helping professionals on what they're passionate about in order to provide you with messages of encouragement and hope. I'm your host, Andrew Earl. The Mind of a Therapist is sponsored by Psychological Counseling Services, healing hearts and transforming lives. Look into our intensive at pcsearl.com. In today's episode, I interview Ken Wells on being average and its role toward finding personal brilliance. As one of the senior therapists at PCS, Ken has 25 years of experience in treating sexual addiction and sex offender behavior. He specializes in confronting denial and addiction and treating the nuance of impact around sex offender behavior. He has experience at all levels of providing family treatment around the impact of addiction and conduct workshops on sexual addiction, shame reduction, and spirituality. He holds a Master of Divinity degree from Nazarene Theological Seminary and has 23 years of pastoral ministry experience. Additionally, he has a Master of Arts degree in counseling from Ottawa University and is certified as a professional counselor, a sex addictions counselor, and a substance abuse counselor. So without further ado, here's the interview. Well, all right then, Ken. So today we're talking about how being average in its role towards personal brilliance. Will you explain to our listeners a bit what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say this. Most people are afraid of the term average. It's kind of a term that has a lot of disdain to it. And it's one that people find disgusting, maybe even so much as failure these days. Like I don't want to be a failure. I want to be a success, and for God's sakes, I don't want to be average. So some even learn to hate it. You know, I read. I'm not a real particular follower of Taylor Swift, but I read she made the statement she's intimidated by the thought of being average. And I think that expresses what people think and feel about that, because focus is so much, Andrew, on results and performance. And I've got to really achieve and excel in order to be okay, not just with myself, but with other people who are judging me and evaluating me. So I've looked at that word, wrestled with that word, and people, you listen to people, you read about Abraham Lincoln. He makes this big statement about there's so many, God must love common people, average people, because he makes so many of them. And I even thought that even when you look at results, even among the very best, then they have people, there's an average mean in all of that. People like, whether you're talking about athletes or academics, you may be a valedictorian of your class, but you go to one university and everybody's a valedictorian, so you find yourself in the middle in some way. And it seems like people absolutely do the best they can to avoid it. And yet people, who when you look at even the performance side of it, people who are average, some of these people are smashing successes in their niche or their performance. Like in football, I think about one of my favorite players is this guy named Josh McCown, who used to be a quarterback for the Cardinals like 16 years ago, but he was only quarterback for maybe 4 or 5 or 6 games, and he's never been like a starter from the beginning of the season to the end. But he's always been kind of a backup quarterback, and he's still playing in the NFL. And most people would look at that kind of guy and say, well, he's pretty average. He's no star-studded quarterback. But geez, he's lasted longer than some of these you know, star quarterbacks that just didn't make it as long as he did. So, you know, average is something that people really disdain. And I found that average, the word, means a lot more than just results. It talks about common stuff of life. It talks about places of mundane, places where we like to gloss over. We like to avoid, like struggle or emotional pain or just failure. That's a place. That's a common thread. Loneliness, that's a common place. Everybody experiences these things. And what I've believed and learned about is that in those common places, which is another way of looking at the word average, those common places that we all experience, that's where a person can discover what I identify as their own personal brilliance. If that makes sense.
Sure. Well, will you explain more about, you were saying in that the common things, elements of life, you know, the common struggles, and finding personal brilliance in that. What would that look like exactly?
Well, I think you have to identify what I started with is just looking at what brilliance means. My belief is that everybody has this sense of brilliance in their life. Your brilliance wouldn't be defined by mine, and mine wouldn't be defined by you. Or yours. I think people recognize that there's this sense of uniqueness, and I've over my own personal struggles and my own journeys in my life, have figured out that that everybody is an unrepeatable miracle of the universe. That's what I really believe. And in that context, that's where people find their sense of specialness, their sense of who they are. It's not so much defined by what they do, but it's who they are. For me, an important writer to me in my life is a guy I have a hard time reading. His name's Martin Buber. But he makes this statement that every person born in the world represents something new, something that's never existed before, something original and unique. That's where brilliance is located. It's that expression of human quality. It's more about being. It's less about doing. And so if you start with that understanding of brilliance, then you have to look at spaces in life that open the door to understanding that. And I think when you sit with your own discomfort, when you sit with the understanding that the everydayness of life is a window to seeing your own brilliance, which is a way of resourcing and finding meaningfulness in all of these experiences of life that we often gloss over of life. You see, and so I think people would be wise to take time to take a look at how they manage and what is average. Because it doesn't really matter to me if you're a celebrity, if you're this best ever ball player, whatever that might be out there, or if you are somebody who I just crossed paths with this morning, who's a homeless individual. We all have a sense of struggle within our life. We all know these things. We experience failure. We experience discomfort. We experience loneliness. We wrestle with our willfulness. Everybody does. And these are common threads that connect all of us together. It's not so much by the doing, you know. It really doesn't matter who we are. We all have these common threads. And I think that what we do is we just overlook them. And we try to focus on results, see. And so I just have discovered that. If you don't mind, I'll just digress a minute. I had, when I was on results issues, when I was a kid in high school, I was voted least likely to go to college. Kind of a kangaroo poll.
Yeah, I've never heard of that happening. How did that happen?
Well, well, to put it blunt and direct, I'll say it this way. I had a business teacher who I caught one night after a football game screwing around with one of my peers who was female. And so I was in class and I was doing my thing, which is kind of disruptive. And he came back and he told me to shut up. And I said, if he didn't back off from me as a kid, not very mature, that I would tell the whole class what I found out him doing on Friday night. So he was pissed and he backed me off. And so what he did is he to get at me, he had this straw poll, I guess you'd call it. I don't know. He took a poll among all the students about who would be least likely to go to college, and he promoted me as the worst in class, and I won the election. So it's kind of a stupid thing, but it did hurt me. I was a vulnerable kid, so I thought that. And then I had other experiences, like I tried to sell Bible books one summer, door to door, did everything they told me to do. I was supposed to make a mint, a big dough. Well, I found out at the end of the summer, after I worked all this as hard as I did, I made $329 and some cents. And so, absolute failure. But I've learned more from those experiences of my life than I ever have from people who identified me as successful in the world I work at as a professional. None of those like identifications ever was as deep as this average experience of humiliation that I think everybody faces sometime in their life, and struggle with failure. See, so I could go on and tell you about what I've learned about that, but just to let you know, I think people leaning into the things they don't want to look at, like maybe I was the last kid picked for pickup basketball or some sport. Maybe I was absolutely awful with algebra, which I was. I was horrible. And I'm embarrassed by those things. If I lean into those experiences, I'll learn more about my brilliance than I ever would by getting some kind of academic achievement. I'm not against academic achievement,
sure,
but I just think it's grossly distorted in terms of its importance. Finding brilliance.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I would definitely be interested in hearing about how those personal experiences that you had, what it looked like for you to lean into them, and then what you gleaned from those experiences that you just mentioned.
Yeah, sure. Well, to me, like an example, when I sold Bible books, it's a long time ago. I was a kid in college. It was awful. I mean, you think about this. Who wants to have someone knock on their door at 8 a.m. and offer them a sale for Bible books, or any time for that matter?
Sure.
So I mean, it's awful. So, and I did that from 8 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. And I didn't make friends. People weren't particularly popular. I wasn't popular with people going door to door. But there's this experience. I had this little dog that it was kind of like a mixed breed dog that stayed on the front porch where I was staying, an old dilapidated house that we got for $50 a month. And we got the first month's rent free because we propped up the porch so you get in the front door, and the guy gave us the first month's rent free. And I didn't have a car. I rode a bicycle out to my little territory, and this little dog would follow me out every day and then disappear once I got to this area where I was going to try to knock on doors. He'd show up the next day. He did this every day throughout my entire summertime. And I, lonely, would get off the bike at times and pat my leg, hoping this little dog would come up. I could pat him on the head. He would get just so close, and then he'd get spooked because evidently he had been abused, and he would scamper back maybe 10 yards. We'd do it all over again, and I never did get to pat that dog all summer long. And what I learned about that is that there's so much insight about my life around how I pursue intimacy with my family, my friends, eventually my wife, and learned how scary it is to be vulnerable, to open my heart and be touched, just like that little dog was afraid. So too have I been afraid. And I would have missed out on that insight that I've feasted on all my days if I hadn't have taken time to note that average experience. Because everybody has those little experiences in their life. So there's great insight, and I've learned my own personal brilliance through experiences just like that.
Well, that's a really really insightful for me. I love this idea of what's often viewed as average or mundane, or pointless. There's all these stories in our society, like you're saying, of focus on success, focus on achievement, and I'm thinking of the dominant narrative that work is this tedious thing that you just have to go to and get over with, and it's better at the end of the day once it's over. But I think that this perspective really lends towards making meaning from those what would normally be labeled as average experiences, and having actually very meaningful experiences throughout your day that you might not otherwise have if you hadn't kind of shifted this frame.
Yes. I think if there's so many people who I hang out, or I don't hang out with them, they come to see me, and when we're sitting and talking, I mean, they can be the most outside accomplished. I mean, outside meaning people recognize them to be extremely accomplished. They got all the dough they need in the world, and yet they haven't found meaningfulness in the everydayness of life, and they're empty in the midst of all of that. And so I think brilliance that people have individually, Andrew, is only limited when I compete and compare my brilliance to someone else's intellect, talent, status, or maybe another observable behavior. When I get into my compete and compare, then I lose my sense of self that quickly. And that's what the world's kind of built up on, and it creates a mentality that I think is a zero-sum mentality, which means there's got to be winners and there's got to be losers, and zero-sum is a real problem in our world today. Zero-sum, like there's this guy who made this quote. I don't know who he is. I just took his quote. His name's Zarif, Z-A-R-I-F. He says, if you look at the developments in the international scene over the past many years, we haven't been able to resolve many problems and many crises because we have approached them from a zero-sum perspective. My gain has always been defined as somebody else's loss. And through that, we never resolve problems. And so, it's like capitalism gone awry. When's enough enough? Well, it's never enough because I have to have more than you have to have. And or else I can't be okay with myself. So when I'm out there focusing on the outside, I lose sight of the inside brilliance that the Creator gave me. This unrepeatable, or this unknown creative source that gives me my own sense of brilliance. I lose sight of that because of a zero-sum mentality. I see it all over the place. I see parents attempting to fulfill their unlived lives through their kids. It happens all the time. I mean, if you look at this, we got this scandal going on right now. Back in March of this year, the FBI uncovers this, and they prosecute several parents of high school kids who conspire with other people to use bribery and other forms of fraud to illegally arrange and have their kids admitted to top colleges, universities. And even wealthy and celebrity families face even felonies and jail sentences in an attempt to get their kid in an atmosphere that they think will bring out the brilliance in their kids. That's crazy. And yet that's what happens when we focus on the outside of ourselves and not on the inside. It's a real barrier to keeping ourselves from finding brilliance in the everyday places, And my boys played ball. So I can remember when they played Little League, I remember this one parent came up to the coach, and he was complaining an awful lot about how the coach was playing their son at the wrong place, wrong position, and he's going to screw up their possibility of getting a full ride scholarship to college, and the kid was 10.
Wow.
It's just craziness.
Yeah.
So it's a way in which we focus and live our lives to others to try to get them to be what I didn't get to be by measuring but what others were. And I rob my child from them being able to be who they are. As I focus on outside compete and compare. And it becomes a real problem in terms of the value of everydayness.
Mm.
There's a spiritual journey there where you can sit and realize that I connect with all living people and all living beings.
Mm.
And in that connection, there's a sense of unique brilliance in it all.
Mm.
And it takes one to be able to go on the inside to discover that, not compete and compare on the outside, if that makes sense.
Sure. So rather than focusing on these external factors, looking at that with that zero-sum mentality that you were mentioning of winners and losers, and for some people, with people who they're in relationships with, children, that example you gave of trying to get what they didn't get as a child through their child. I'm wondering for our listeners who this is resonating with, what are some practical steps that they can take towards leaning into that personal brilliance and taking some of those steps?
Well, let me tell you a couple of things. One, there's some benefits in doing it. The benefit is there's a sense of personal empowerment that happens when I tell my own story.
Mm.
See, telling my story, like I grew up in a church, and in the church I grew up in, we used to have these, what we call testimonies. You stand up and you tell what Jesus did in your life. Okay, and I heard the same old story so often that I can give some of our people, when I grew up, I can still give their testimony because I heard it so many times. I don't mean a story like that. I mean a story that goes deep within. It's a story of discovery. Like, I'm an addict, been in recovery for 30 years. And what I've learned out of this is to go in and understand the depths of who I am by telling on myself, by embracing honesty, by embracing struggle, and by being real and authentic about that. When I tell my personal story, I find my brilliance. See? So I would encourage people to engage community whereby people sit down and they're honest with each other. Sure, it could be church, but most often it's not, sadly to say. But it can happen anywhere two people get together and they're willing to open their heart and be real. That's one place to begin to discover the significance of average, because I'll hear your story, you'll hear my story, and we'll find connection, not because if you're a butterfly collector and I'm a butterfly collector, not from that context, but rather because of a common shared struggle and brokenness. Some people refer to it as a torn to pieces hood. When I share that piece, wow, I mean, there's a lot of insight that comes. So I think also a benefit is I create this intimate connection with myself and other people when I tell my story. And I think also embracing average will teach me the fundamentals of basic self-care and in the presence of human struggle. There's a woman whose name is Pema Chodron. She's a Buddhist monk, and she makes this statement that really resonates with me. She says, compassion about people, about self, is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. That piece, when I go deep and understand my darkness, then I can open my heart to your darkness. And in that context, that is where we find a common shared connection. So to me, to do that, I always encourage people to do maybe, I mean, there's not just one way, but here are 5 concepts that help me. One is I need to create and maintain what I call a beginner's mindset. That is, I need to be hungry to know what's inside me, and I tend not to want to do that when it's painful.
Sure.
But I've learned not to be masochistic, but I've learned that leaning into that helps me to realize these benefits that come from embracing average. Then I think it's important to embrace humility before I just an understanding that I need connection with others outside of my life to help me understand my own average and commonplace struggle and situation in life. So embracing humility versus egotism, is really important. I think it's important to cultivate a listening spirit. So like right now, I'm doing all the talking and it's not all that helpful to me. It might be helpful to somebody, but I do a lot better when I can keep my mouth shut and listen to what other people are saying, including the universe, including my own feelings. So cultivating a listening spirit. For me, it's like what I try to do is identify, I think all my feelings, my anxieties, my depressions, my joys, all these different feelings that come to me. I believe I frame it from the context as the voice of God, kind of a metaphor. What I think of is, well, this is the universe talking to me about what's out of balance if I listen to it. So I think cultivating listening spirit is helpful. I think overcoming what I call, well, the Buddhist folk call fixed-mindedness with an open heart. I can easily close my heart to your experience of life. And in this whole world that we live in, black and white thinking, the right, the left, the truth of it is, we can easily get stuck in my own fixed-mindedness, and I don't open my heart to your experience, to your truth, to who you are. So I think that, and the final thing is just practice being transparent and practice the art of telling on myself, to you, to whoever. I found those things to really open up a whole dynamic enlightenment to the everydayness of life that makes it rich, makes it deep, and helps me to connect to myself and the great unknown.
And so you were mentioning there telling on self. What would that look like?
It would mean if I'm intimidated by you, if I'm afraid in life, if I feel like crying, that I would be vulnerable and share those experiences and share those feelings. I'm not suggesting that I walk around an open book to the whole world, so that if I went to bed, which I did until I was age 5, I just tell the whole, until I was in the 5th grade, I tell the whole world about that. That's not very helpful. But I think it's really important to find those significant ones that I could call in as a community. And then I open my heart and talk about my truth, about self, about others in the room, and risk rejection. And also cultivate deep acceptance by telling on my vulnerable feelings that, like for instance, if some guy were to say he's afraid or start to cry because he's in deep sadness, a lot of men in America would identify that as threatening to his man card. So I think it takes someone who's willing to be courageous, to be so vulnerable, to be real and honest about what's on the inside. And I think that's what I mean by telling on myself.
Yeah, those ideas of courage that you're talking about, that's really resonant with me with the, the personal work that I've done, and every person that I've talked to, who is really stepped into those challenging spaces, that you've been talking about. It's just, it's scary, brings up fear. From my bias, one of the more challenging things that we have to do in life. But that reward of, as you're talking about earlier, of finding those community members, those people who you've really connected with, and really step into those scary places with them. For me, those have been some of the most rewarding experiences I've had in life, with family, with friends. And so, yeah, it's those ideas are deeply resonant with me.
Well, I think, yeah, me too. And I would just share that and add that we're creatures of community, and we need to connect. And so often do the experiences of life lead us to isolate when we need to insulate and connect with each other at a deep level. Historically, it's happened in all sorts of venues, church included, but it's also miserably failed in all sorts of venues, church included. And I think what is important is that we can recognize the value of opening our hearts and being real and finding the meaningfulness there. And as we are real, we also find ways to resource ourselves in all sorts of ways. And I've always believed, and believe even more firm, that the greatest healing source that exists in the universe today is found inside me and inside you and inside all of us. And so we have all these different modalities that we help people with, and they're all wonderful. But Andrew, to me, nothing has been so powerful in transforming my life than my own story, because in it is housed the healing power that helps me to connect with self, you, and the great unknown. That's what I, and it's been a wonderful experience. Now, these things I shared, when someone's being asked questions, it's like he's got all the answers. I'm just discovering and identifying all these issues that I hope to expend effort to go deeper with the rest of my life. I wouldn't consider myself an expert on any of these things, other than the fact that I'm aware that I have to do a lot of digging and exploring and mining to find the meaningfulness that matters most to me. So if I share anything, it's from that perspective. It's not like I've mastered any of it.
Yeah, so an area of interest for me is shame, and this idea is really intriguing to me. I've heard Yalom call it the fellow journeyer mentality, or the process. Being in a lifelong process. There's not this end goal that dominant stories in our society would have us believe exists. And to me, it just seems like it could be, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, but to me, it seems like it can be such a catalyst for shame, because if there's this place that you need to get to, that you'll never get to because of the dominant stories of, whether it's, achieving this sort of financial success, looking this certain way, these dominant stories in our society, I don't think we have a chance at ever meeting up to. And this mentality of being in process, being on this journey your whole life, in my language, it seems like it could serve as an antidote to shame.
Yeah. Well, shame is just one of those powerful, some people identify it as a master emotion. I don't know enough about shame to call it that. I do know enough about shame to say that it's a reality of our life. Some people say, well, no shame is good and guilt can be helpful. Well, for me, anytime I go against my values, I don't even have to go against my values, but anytime I do go against my values, I feel both shame and guilt. My hope is to to do what I've suggested is I lean into shame, meaning that rather than to run from it, like, I have this picture of a pack of wolves chasing me through the woods, and I develop all these coping mechanisms through doing and performing, and I keep the shame at bay, but it never backs off. It's relentless, and it keeps nipping at my heels. At some point, to stop and turn around and face that pack of wolves is the design I believe is best about life. And so leaning into shame is keeping it off my personhood, placing it in two directions. One, its original source, which would be my family of origin, messages that either were spoken or I gained from modeling about mistaken beliefs that are dominating me in the form of shame right now. So I give that back, and I also place it on behaviors that are hurtful. I can do behaviors that are destructive and not be destructive in my heart. So I could do crappy things and not be a piece of crap. I'd say it that way. So if I keep that shame on behavior, it comes back to what I read with Pema Chodron. That darkness, when I know my darkness well, it generates compassion for those who I've hurt. Because behavior is a aberration to who I am. And when I reckon with the hurt and the pain that someone has gone through because of my behavior, then it helps me to change that very behavior. So I've taken shame and transform it from a curse to a blessing, which is in the transformation of shame to compassion. And I believe the human spirit has the capacity to do just that.
Wow. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time here, Ken. The question that I like to finish up with is, what's I mean, you've already given a lot of people messages of hope, but I like to end with what's a message of hope that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think if I could simply help people to realize that in their common shared brokenness, which encompasses the everyday, average spaces in life that we all share, we would find the brilliance of healing that would heal the world and save us from destruction. It's not just about me feeling good about myself, but it's about my healing agent within to be a part of healing the world that I live in. That's what I'm looking with.
Wow. Well, I've gleaned so much from this conversation, Ken. I really value your time, and thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Andrew. Hey, thanks for doing these things. That's nice.
Oh, absolutely. Please press the subscribe button, as well as rate and review our podcast. This helps others connect with what you've been hearing. If you have any questions, please contact us at themindofatherapist@gmail.com. These questions will be kept anonymous. I want to thank Ken Wells for the interview. I know a lot of our conversation was deeply resonant with me, and I hope you've had a similar experience. I want to thank Eric Price for the wonderful music you hear in this podcast. Additionally, this podcast was created to provide accurate and authoritative information on the subject matter. Although we are interviewing licensed therapists, they are not your therapist. This podcast is not intended to serve as direct medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for direct professional help. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, guest, or PCS are rendering legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you need a professional, we encourage you to find one. Visit Psychology Today to connect with a licensed clinician near you.